Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Breakfast and Books. My name is Courtney. I am one of the teen librarians at the Addison Public Library. And hey, welcome in. It is a properly stormy day. If you are in the Chicagoland area and around Addison, Illinois itself, we had wonderful thunderstorms this morning, and I'm pretty sure that that will set the mood quite nicely for what we are doing today. So, we are going to be reading the next chapter in the Hounds of the Baskervilles. This is, if you've been watching, you already know what it is. But this is a very famous Sherlock Holmes story written by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Sherlock Holmes is a fictional detective, and his trusty friend and partner in detectiving, John Watson. So the story is written from John Watson, or it's written in a way where it's like John is the one writing the story. Canonically, inside the world of Sherlock Holmes, John chronicles all of Sherlock's various adventures and cases, and then he publishes them, and he becomes quite famous within the world of Sherlock Holmes. And, stuff happens. So, The Hound of the Baskervilles is a mix of a murder mystery. There is the Lord of the Baskervilles has died, and his heir is about to take his place at the Baskerville Hall, which is in the moors, which is in like a area that's like very hilly. And honestly, if you look at it's gorgeous. It's a very pretty landscape. But it can also be pretty dangerous because people get lost out there, and you never know. People could like fall, or it's very misty, and you just have to be careful when you're out walking by yourself. But it is very beautiful, hilly, just gorgeous, gorgeous area. So the old Lord of the Baskervilles had died under very mysterious circumstances. And the new one, Henry Baskerville, he is about to go and take up his rightful place at Baskerville Hall. But there is potentially a supernatural curse that has followed this family. So anytime that any of the Baskervilles live at this hall, they are haunted by a giant demonic dog. So James Mortimer, who is a doctor that is familiar with the family, has asked Sherlock Holmes to intervene and, uh, you know, if not solve the mystery of the murder, to help figure out what actually is going on, or save this new Henry Baskerville from the same fate. Sir Henry Baskerville, he is a sir. So interesting that. So at this point, um, Sherlock has sent John Watson to go and be with Sir Henry Baskerville when he goes to Baskerville Hall. And Sherlock was going to stay back because he has stuff to do. He has other cases that he has to work on, but he's like, Watson's great. He'll write to me with any detail, any information that we need, and he'll give me anything that's very important to tell. So right now we are just arriving in the area. So they took a train to Baskerville Hall, to the town to Baskerville Hall. And so this is the characters that we have with us are Dr. James Mortimer. There is who is the family doctor, sort of, Sir Henry Baskerville, and John Watson. Now, much of this story is written in dialogue, so it's kind of tricky to figure out like who's saying what, but I'll do my best. Um, okay, so this is narration from John Watson, and they had just arrived on the train. Our friends had already secured a first-class carriage and were waiting for us upon the platform. No, we had no news of any kind, said Dr. Mortimer in answer to my friend's questions. Oh, who is the friend? Who are we talking about? Oh, I see. Yeah, this is sorry. We stopped mid-chapter last time. Um, oh yeah, let's do that. All right, so currently, we'll start here. Currently, they are on the train, and John Watson is describing the. Um, we're trying real hard today to use words, aren't we? Yes, we are. So John Watson is describing the landscape. So this will give you the idea of it. Over the green squares of the fields and the low curve of a wood that rose in the distance, a gray, melancholy hill, with a strange, jagged summit, dim and vague in the distance, like some fantastic landscape in a dream. Baskerville sat for a long time, his eyes fixed upon it, and I read upon his eager face how much it meant to him. This first sight of that strange spot where the men of his blood had held sway for so long and left their mark so deep. There he sat, with his tweed suit and his American accent, with the corner of a prosaic railway carriage, and yet as I looked at his dark and expressive face, I felt more than ever how true a descendant he was of that long line of high-blooded, fiery, and masterful men. There were pride, there were pride, valor, and strength in his thick brows, his sensitive nostrils, and his large hazel eyes. If on that forbidding moor a difficult and dangerous quest should lie before us, this was at least a comrade for whom one might venture to take a risk, with the certainty that he should surely brave it. And bravely share it. That's it. Hi, Green Mod. Thanks for popping in. The train pulled up at a small way station, and we all descended. Outside, beyond the low white fence, a wagonette with a pair of cobs was waiting. Our coming was evidently a great event, for station master and porters clustered around us to carry out our luggage. It was a sweet, simple country spot, but I was surprised to observe that by the gate there stood two soldierly men in dark uniforms, who leaned upon their short rifles and glanced keenly at us as we passed. The coachman, a hard-faced, gnarled little fellow, saluted Sir Henry Baskerville, and in a few minutes we were flying down the broad white road. Rolling pasture lands curved up on either side of us. The old gabled houses peeped out from amid the thick green foliage, but behind the peaceful and sunlit countryside there rose, ever dark against the evening sky, the long, gloomy curve of the moor, broken by the jagged and sinister hills. The wagonette swung round into a side road, and we curved upward through the deep lanes worn by centuries of wheels, high banks on either side, heavy with the dripping moss and fleshy heart-tongues ferns. Bronzing bracken, ooh, bracken's such a fun word. It's sort of like a foliage, a plant life thing. Bronzing bracken and mottled bramble gleamed in the light of the sinking sun, in the sinking sun. Still steadily rising, we passed over a narrow granite bridge and skirted a noisy stream which gushed swiftly down, foaming and roaring amid the gray boulders. Both road and stream wound up through a valley dense with scrub oak and fir. At every turn, Baskerville gave an exclamation of delight, looking eagerly about him and asking countless questions. To his eyes all seemed beautiful, but to me a tinge of melancholy lay upon the countryside, which bore so clearly the mark of the waning year. Yellow leaves carpeted the lanes and fluttered down upon us as we passed. The rattle of our wheels died away as we drove through drifts of rotting vegetation, sad gifts, as it seemed to me, for nature to throw before the carriage of the returning heir of the Baskervilles. So this is fall time. So they've got, all the colorful trees. And, honestly, it sounds very pretty. Hello, cried Dr. Mortimer. What is this? A steep curve of heath-clad land, an outlying spur of the moor, lay in front of us, and on the summit, hard and clear like an equestrian statue upon its pedestal, was a mounted soldier. Dark and stern, his rifle poised ready over his forearm. He was watching the road along which we traveled. "What is this, Perkins?" said Dr. Mortimer. Our driver half turned in his seat. "There's a convict escaped from Princetown, sir. He's been out 3 days now, and the warders watch every road and every station. But they've no sight of him yet. The farmers around here don't like it, sir, and that's a fact." There's a storm is starting to kick up outside. In actuality, I can hear the wind through the walls, which these are pretty big walls. So, ooh. So if at any point there's any sirens or things and I have to cut the stream short, so be it. We've had to do that before sometimes. Okay. So there's an escaped prisoner. Ooh, that's exciting. Pardon me. Okay. Well, I understand that they get £5 if they can give information. Yes, sir, but the chance of £5 is a poor thing compared to the chance of having your throat cut. You see, it isn't like any ordinary convict. This is a man that would stick at nothing. Who is he then? It is Selden, the Notting Hill murderer. Ooh. I remembered the case well, for it was one in which Holmes had taken an interest on account of the peculiar ferocity of the crime and the wanton brutality which had marked all the actions of the assassin. The commutation, that's a word. The commutation of his death sentence had been due to some doubts as to his complete sanity. So atrocious was his conduct. So basically, he was given a death sentence, but there was a lot of debate about it because his crime was so intense, they thought he was insane and it wouldn't be fair to give him a death sentence. Interesting. Our wagonette had topped a rise, and in front of us rose the huge expanse of the moor, mottled with gnarled and craggy cairns and tors. A cold wind swept down from it and sent us shivering. Somewhere there, on that desolate plain, was lurking this fiendish man, hiding in a burrow like a wild beast, his heart full of malignancy against the whole race which had cast him out. It needed but this to complete the grim suggestiveness of the barren waste, the chilling wind, and the darkling sky. Even Baskerville fell silent and pulled his overcoat more closely around him. Fair, I'd also be a little bit nervous on this one too. Like, oh, great, cool, thanks. Welcome home. There's a murder on loose. We had left the fertile country behind us and beneath us. We had looked back on it now, the slanting rays of the low sun turning the streams threads of gold, and glowing on the red earth new turned by the plough and the broad tangle of the woodlands. The road in front of us grew bleaker and wilder over huge russet and olive slopes, sprinkled with giant boulders. Now and then we passed a moorland cottage walled and roofed with stone, with no creeper to break its harsh outline. Suddenly, not a Minecraft creeper, it's like, a type of plant. Suddenly we looked down into a cup-like depression, patched with stunted oaks and firs which had been twisted and bent by the fury of years of storms. Two high, narrow towers rose over the trees. The driver pointed with his whip. "Baskerville Hall," he said. Its master had risen and was staring with flushed cheeks and shining eyes. A few minutes later, we had reached the lodge gates and a maze of fantastic tracery in the wrought iron, with weather-bitten pillars on either side, blotched with lichen? I think it's lichen. And surmounted by the boar's head of the Baskervilles. The lodge was a ruin of black granite and bared ribs of rafters, but facing it was a new building, half constructed, the first fruit of Sir Charles's South African gold. So Sir Charles Baskerville is the one who died and left Sir Henry Baskerville the estate and his fortune. He also came back from South Africa with like a lot of money, like Guy was like a millionaire then, and so woof, like that's a lot of money. Um, and if you weren't here for it before, he used a lot of that money to really help the community around Baskerville Hall. He funded several charities and is kind of like kickstarting a lot of things there, which is why people are very eager to have Sir Henry Baskerville there to kind of keep up the work. Through the gateway, we passed into the avenue where the wheels were again hushed, where the wheels were again hushed again amid the leaves, and the old trees shot their branches in a somber tunnel over our heads. Baskerville shuddered as he looked up at the long, dark drive where the house glimmered like a ghost at the farther end. Was it here? He asked in a low voice. No, the yew alley is on the other side. He's talking about where his uncle died. The young heir glanced round with a gloomy face. It's no wonder my uncle felt as if trouble were coming on him in such a place as this, he said. It's enough to scare any man, and I'll have a row of electric lamps up here inside 6 months, and you won't know it again, with 1,000 candle power Swan and Edison right here in front of the hall door. The avenue. So he's like, forget candles. I'm installing lights. Like, we're not gonna keep this dark. Lights. Which would also, honestly, that'd look really pretty. The avenue opened into a broad expanse of turf, and the house lay before us. In the fading light, I could see that the center was a heavy block. Hi. Okay, sure. Thank you. All right. The avenue was opened into a broad expanse of turf, and the house lay before us. In the fading light, I could see the center was a heavy block of building from which a porch projected. The whole front was draped in ivy, with a patch clipped bare here and there where a window or a coat of arms broke through the dark veil. From this central block rose the twin towers, ancient, crenulated. That's such a good word, crenulated. So crenulated is if you look at like castles, where the stones kind of go up and down and up and down. That's crenulations. Crenulated. From this central block rose the twin towers, ancient, crenulated, and pierced with many loopholes. To the right and left of the turrets were more modern wings of black granite. A dull light shone through heavy, mullioned windows, and from the high chimneys rose from the steep, high-angled roof. There sprang a single black column of smoke. Welcome, Sir Henry. Welcome to Baskerville Hall. A tall man had stepped from the shadow of the porch to open the door of the wagonette. The figure of a woman was silhouetted against the yellow light of the hall. She came out and helped the man to hand down our bags. You don't mind me driving straight home, Sir Henry, said Dr. Mortimer. My wife is expecting me. Surely you will stay and have some dinner. No, I must go. I shall probably find some work awaiting me. I would stay to show you over the house, but Barrymore will be a better guide than I. Barrymore is the butler. I don't know if the butler did it, but you're welcome to suspect him. There's some things that are suspicious. Goodbye, and never hesitate, day or night, to send for me if I can be of service. I think it was established before that Dr. Mortimer lives about 3 hours right away, so it's a trip, but hey, it's fair. He wants to go home. The wheels died away down the drive while Sir Henry and I turned into the hall, and the door clanged heavily behind us. It was a fine apartment in which we found ourselves, large, lofty, and heavily raftered with huge balks of age-blackened oak. In the great old-fashioned fireplace behind the high iron dogs, a log fire crackled and snapped. Sir Henry and I held our hands out to it, for we were numb from our long drive. Then we gazed round at the high, thin window of old stained glass, the oak paneling, the stag's head, the coat of arms upon the walls, all dim and sombre in the subdued light of the central lamp. It's just as I imagined it, said Sir Henry. Is it not the very picture of an old family home? To think that this should be the same hall in which for 500 years my people had lived. It strikes me solemn to think of it. I saw his dark face light up with boyish enthusiasm as he gazed about him. The light beat upon him where he stood, but long shadows trailed down the walls and hung like black canopy above him. Barrymore had returned from taking our luggage to our rooms. He stood in front of us now with the subdued manner of a well-trained servant. He was a remarkable-looking man, tall, handsome, with a square black beard and pale, distinguished features. Would you wish dinner to be served at once, sir? Is it ready? In a very few minutes, sir. You will find hot water in your rooms. My wife and I will be happy, Sir Henry, to stay with you until you have made your fresh arrangements. But you will understand that under the new conditions this house will require a considerable staff. What new conditions? I only meant, sir, that Sir Charles led a very retired life, and we were able to look after his wants. You would, naturally, wish to have more company, and so you will need changes in your household. Do you mean that your wife and you wish to leave? Only when it is convenient to you, sir. But your family has been with us for several generations, have they not? I should be sorry to begin my life here by breaking an old family connection. I seemed to discern some signs of emotion upon the butler's white face. I feel that also, sir, and so does my wife. But to tell you the truth, sir, we were both very much attached to Sir Charles, and his death gave us a shock and made these surroundings very painful to us. I fear that we shall never again be easy in our minds at Baskerville Hall. But what do you intend to do? I have no doubt, sir, that we shall succeed in establishing ourselves in some business. Sir Charles's generosity has given us the means to do so. And now, sir, perhaps I had best show you to your rooms. A square, balustraded the words have stumbled me today. A square, balustraded gallery ran round the top of the old hall, approached by a double stair. From the central point, two long corridors extended the whole length of the building, from which all the bedrooms opened. My own was in the same wing as Baskervilles, and almost next door to it. These rooms appeared to be much more modern than the central part of the house, and the bright paper and numerous candles did something to remove the sombre impression which our arrival had left upon my mind. Paper, so the bright paper, I'm guessing wallpaper on that, so just brighter colors in there. But the dining room, which opened out of the hall, was a place of shadow and gloom. It was a long chamber with a step separating the dais where the family sat from the lower portion reserved for their dependents. At one end, a minstrel's gallery overlooked it, so sort of like a little stage. Black beams shot across above overhead with a smoke-darkened ceiling beyond them, with rows of flaring torches to light it up, and the color and rude hilarity of an old-time banquet. It might have softened, but now, okay, what he's saying is that with the if it had rows of torches to light it up and also like the decorations of like a banquet, it would have been nicer. But now, when two black-clothed gentlemen sat in the little circle of light thrown by a shaded lamp, one's voice became hushed and one's spirit became subdued. A dim line of ancestors in every variety of dress, from the Elizabethan knight to the buck of the Regency, stared down upon us, daunted us by their silent company. We talked little, and I for one was glad when the meal was over, and we were able to retire into the modern billiard room and smoke a cigarette. So they were eating dinner in like a giant hall, all alone, and it was dark, and they just had a circle of light and just, ooh. Hello, good to see you here. All right, we are reading The Hound of the Baskervilles. We're just finishing up this chapter. They have come into Baskerville Hall, and they're settling in. They just got here. My word, this isn't a very cheerful place, said Sir Henry. I suppose one can tone down to it, but I feel a bit out of the picture at the present. I don't wonder that my uncle got a little jumpy if he lived all alone in such a house as this. However, if it suits you, we will retire early tonight. Perhaps things may seem more cheerful in the morning. I drew aside my curtains before I went to bed, and looked out from my window. It opened upon the grassy space which lay in front of the hall door. Beyond, two copses of trees moaned and swung in the rising wind. A half moon broke through the rifts of the racing clouds. In its cold light I saw beyond the trees a broken fringe of rocks and the long, low curve of the melancholy moor. I closed the curtain, feeling that my last impression was in keeping with the rest. And yet it was not quite the last. I found myself weary and yet wakeful, tossing restlessly from side to side, seeking for the sleep which would not come. Far away a chiming clock struck out the quarters of the hours, but otherwise a deathly silence lay upon the old house. And then suddenly, in the very dead of the night, there came a sound to my ears, clear, resonant, and unmistakable. It was the sob of a woman, the muffled, strangling gasp of one who is torn by an uncontrollable sorrow. I sat up in bed and listened intently. The noise could not have been far away and was certainly in the house. For half an hour I waited with every nerve on alert, but there came no other sound save the chiming clock and the rustle of the ivy on the wall. Spooky. All right, chapter 7. Here we go. All right, we've got about 20 minutes left. Let's see how far we go. The Stapletons of Merripit House, chapter 7. The fresh beauty of the following morning did something to efface from our minds the grim and grey impression which had been left upon both of us by our first experience of Baskerville Hall. As Sir Henry and I sat at breakfast, the sunlight flooded in through the high mullioned windows, throwing watery patches of colour from the coat of arms which covered them. The dark panelling glowed like bronze in the golden light, and was hard to realize that this was indeed the chamber which had struck such a gloom into our souls upon the evening before. Things always seems a little bit nicer in the morning light. That helps. I guess it is ourselves, and not the house, that we have to blame, said the baronet. We were tired with our journey and chilled by our drive, so we took a grey view of the place. Now we are fresh and well, so it is all cheerful once more. And yet it was not entirely a question of imagination, I answered. Did you, for example, happen to hear someone, a woman, I think, sobbing into the night? That is curious, for I did, when I was half asleep, fancy that I heard something of the sort. I waited quite a time, but there was no more of it, so I concluded that it was all a dream. Oh, I heard it distinctly, and I am sure that it was really the sob of a woman. Well, we must ask about this right away. He rang the bell and asked Barrymore whether he could account for our experience. It seems to me that the pallid features of the butler turned a shade paler still as he listened to his master's question. There are only 2 women in the house, Sir Henry, he answered. One is the scullery maid, who sleeps in the other wing. The other is my wife, and I can answer for it that the sound could not have come from her. And yet he lied as he said it, for it chanced that after breakfast I met Mrs. Barrymore in the long corridor with the sun full on her face. She was a large, impassive, heavy-featured woman with a stern-set expression of mouth. But her telltale eyes were red and glanced at me from between swollen lids. It was she, then, who wept in the night, and if she did so, her husband must not know it, or must know it, rather. That's what it says. Her husband must know it. Yet he had taken the obvious risk of discovery in declaring that it was not so. Why had he done this? And why did she weep so bitterly? Already round this pale-faced, handsome, black-bearded man there was a gathering of an atmosphere of mystery and of gloom. It was he who had been the first to discover the body of Sir Charles, and we had only his word for all the circumstances which led up to the old man's death. Was it possible that it was Barrymore, after all, whom we have seen in the cab at Regent Street? So that's referencing several chapters back when they were in London. Somebody was following in a cab, in a like a carriage, horse carriage. Somebody was following Sir Henry Baskerville, and there's some mystery there. We weren't able to figure out who it was. But they did see that the person had a really big beard, but they suspected that it was a fake beard, but maybe it wasn't. They saw it from a distance. So was it possible that it was Barrymore after all, which we had seen in the cab in Regent Street? The beard might well have been the same. The cabman had described a somewhat shorter man, but was an impression might easily have been erroneous. That's a fun word to say. So like erroneous is with error. How could I settle the point forever? Obviously, the first thing to do was to see the Grimpen postmaster and find whether the test telegram had really been placed in Barrymore's own hands. Be the answer what it might, I should at least have something to report to Sherlock Holmes. Sir Henry had numerous papers to examine after breakfast, so that the time was propitious for my excursion. It was a pleasant walk of 4 miles along the edge of the moor, leading me at last to a small grey hamlet, in which 2 larger buildings, which proved to be the inn and the house of Dr. Mortimer, stood high above the rest. The postmaster, who was also the village grocer, had a clear recollection of the telegram. "Certainly, sir," he said. "I had a telegram delivered to Mr. Barrymore exactly as directed." "Who delivered it?" "My boy here. James, you delivered the telegram to Mr. Barrymore at the Hall last week, did you not?" "Yes, father, I delivered it." "Into his own hands?" I asked. "Well, he was up at the loft at the time, so that I could not put it into his own hands, but I gave it to Mrs. Barrymore, and she promised to deliver it at once." "Did you see Mr. Barrymore?" "No, sir. I tell you that he was in the loft." "If you didn't see him, how do you know that he was in the loft?" "Well, surely his own wife ought to know where he is," said the Barrymore testily. Not the Barrymore. The postmaster said this testily. "Didn't he get the telegram? If there is any mistake, it is for Mr. Barrymore himself to complain." It seemed hopeless to pursue the inquiry any further, but it was clear that in spite of Holmes's ruse, there was no proof that Barrymore had been in London at the time, had not been at London at the time. So what they had done before is they suspected that Barrymore might have been the one who was following Baskerville in London. So they sent a telegram to Barrymore at Baskerville Hall, and with instructions that hand it to this guy specifically. If he's not there, bring it back, send it back to us. So they got note that they did deliver it. So they assumed that Barrymore was actually at Baskerville Hall, since it should have been delivered to him. But now we find out that it was actually delivered to his wife. Ooh, scary, scary. Okay. It seemed hopeless to pursue the inquiry any further, but it was clear that in spite of Holmes's ruse, we had no proof that Barrymore had not been in London at all that time. Suppose that it were so. Suppose that the same man had been the last who had seen Sir Charles alive, and the first to dog the new heir when he returned to England. What then? Was he the agent of others that had some sinister design of his own? What interest could he have in persecuting the Baskerville family? I thought of the strange warning, clipped out of the leading article of the Times. Was that his work, or was it possibly the doing of someone who bent upon counteracting his schemes? The only conceivable motive was that which had been suggested by Sir Henry, that if the family could be scared away, a comfortable and permanent home would be secured for the Barrymores. But surely such an explanation as that would be quite inadequate to account for the deep and subtle scheming which seemed to be weaving an invisible net round the young baronet. Holmes himself had said that no more complex case had come to him in all the long series of his sensational investigations. I prayed as I walked back along the gray, lonely road that my friend might soon be freed from his preoccupations and be able to come down to take this heavy burden of responsibility from my shoulders. Suddenly, my thoughts were interrupted by the sound of running feet behind me and a voice which called my name. I turned, expecting to see Dr. Mortimer, but to my surprise it was a stranger who was pursuing me. He was a small, slim, clean-shaven, prim-faced man, flaxen-haired, and lean-jawed, so like a thin face. Between 30 and 40 years of age, dressed in a gray suit and wearing a straw hat. A tin box of botanical specimens hung over his shoulder and he carried a green butterfly net in one of his hands. "You will, I am sure, excuse my presumption, Dr. Watson," he said as he came panting up where I stood. "Here on the moor we are homely folk, and do not wait for formal introductions. You may possibly have heard my name from our mutual friend Mortimer. I am Stapleton, of the Merripit House." "Your net and box would have told me as much," I said, for I knew that Mr. Stapleton was a naturalist. "But how did you know me?" "I have been calling on Mortimer, and he pointed you out to me from the window of his surgery as you passed. As our road lay the same way, I thought that I would overtake you and introduce myself. I trust Sir Henry is none the worse for his journey?" "He is well, thank you." "We were all rather afraid after the sad death of Sir Charles the new baronet might refuse to live here. It is asking much of a wealthy man to come down and bury himself in a place kind of like this kind. There we go. But I need not tell you that it means a very great deal to the countryside. Sir Henry has, I suppose, no superstitious fears of the matter?" "I do not think that is likely." "Of course you do know the legend of the fiend dog that haunts the family?" "I have heard it." "It is extraordinary how credulous the peasants are about here. Any number of them are ready to swear that they have seen such a creature upon the moor." He spoke with a smile, but I seemed to read in his eyes that he took the matter more seriously. "The story took a great hold upon the imagination of Sir Charles, and I have no doubt that it led to his tragic end." "But how?" "Oh, his nerves were so worked up that the appearance of any dog might have had a fatal effect upon his diseased heart. I fancy that he really did something of the kind upon the last night in the yew alley. I fear that some disaster might occur, for I was very fond of the old man, and I knew his heart was weak." "How did you know that, friend?" "Well, my friend Mortimer told me." "You think, then, that some dog pursued Sir Charles, and that he died of fright in the consequence? Have you a better explanation?" "Well, I have not come to any conclusion." "Has Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" The words took my breath for an instant, but a glance at the placid face and the steadfast eyes of my companion showed that no surprise was intended. "It is useless for us to pretend that we do not no, sorry, it's really hard because it's very conversational, so it's kind of tricky to tell who's who. So this is Stapleton speaking. "It is useless for us to pretend that we do not know you, Dr. Watson," said he. "The records of your detective have reached us here, and you could not celebrate him without being known yourself. When Mortimer told me your name, he could not deny your identity. If you are here, then it follows that Mr. Sherlock Holmes is interested himself in the matter, and I am naturally curious to know what view he might take." "I am afraid I cannot answer that question." "May I ask if he's going to honor us with a visit himself?" "Oh, he cannot leave town at present. He has other cases which engage his attention." "Oh, what a pity! We might throw some light on which that is so dark to us. But as to your own researches, if there is any possible way in which I can be of service to you, I trust that you will command me. If I had any indication of the nature of your suspicions, or how you propose to investigate the case, I might perhaps even now give you some aid or advice. I assure you that I am simply here to visit a friend, Sir Henry, and that I am no help of any kind. Excellent, said Stapleton. You are perfectly right to be wary and discreet. I am justly reproved that for what I feel was an unjustifiable intrusion, and I promise you that I will not mention the matter again. He had come to the point where a narrow grassy path struck off from the road and wound away from the moor. A steep, boulder-sprinkled hill lay upon the right, which had in bygone days been cut into the granite quarry. The face which had turned towards us formed a dark cliff, with ferns and brambles growing in it in its niches. Niches is also a fun word. From over a distant rise there floated a gray plume of smoke, not stroke. We're coming to the end of me being able to speak, I swear. A moderate walk along this moor path brings us to Merripit House, he said. Perhaps you will spare an hour, that I may have the pleasure of introducing you to my sister? My first thought was that I should be with Sir Henry side, but then I remembered the pile of papers and bills with which his study table was littered. It was certain that I could not help with those, and Holmes had expressly said that I should study the neighbours upon the moor. I accepted Stapleton's invitation, and we turned together down the path. It is a wonderful place, the moor, he said, looking round over the undulating downs, the long green rollers, and the crests of jagged granite forming up into fantastic surges. You never tire of the moor. You cannot think the wonderful secrets which it contains. It is so vast and so barren and so mysterious. You know it well, then? Oh, I have only been here 2 years. The residents would call me a newcomer. We came shortly after Sir Charles settled, but my taste led me to explore every part of the country road, and I should think that there are few men who know it better than I do. Is it hard to know? Very hard. You see, for example, this great plain to the north here, with the strange hills breaking out of it. Do you observe anything remarkable about that? It would be a rare place for a gallop. You would naturally think so, and the thought has cost several their lives before now. You notice those bright green spots scattered thickly over it? Yes, they seem more fertile than the rest. Stapleton laughed. That is the great Grimpen Mire, he said. A false step yonder means death to a man or beast. Only yesterday I saw one of the moor ponies wander into it. He never came out. I saw his head for quite a long time craning out of that bog hole, but it sucked him down at last. Even in the dry seasons, it's a danger to cross it. But after these autumn rains, it's an awful place. Yet I can find my way to the very heart of it and return alive. By George, there is another one of those miserable ponies. Something brown was rolling and tossing among the green sedges. Then a long, agonized, writhing neck shot upward, and a dreadful cry echoed over the moor. It turned me cold with horror, but my companion's nerves seemed to be stronger than mine. It's gone, he said. The mire has 'em. 2 in 2 days, and many more perhaps, for if they get in the way of going down there during the dry weather, and never know the difference until the moor has them in their clutches. It's a bad place, the great Grimpen Mire. And you say you can penetrate it? Yes, well, there are 1 or 2 paths which a very active man can take. I have found them out. But why should you wish to go to such a horrible place? Well, you see the hills beyond? They're really islands, cut off on all sides by the impassable mire, which has crawled round in them the course of the years. That is where the rare plants and the butterflies are, if you have the wit to reach them. I shall try my luck some day. He looked at me with a surprised face. For God's sake, put an idea out of your mind, he said. Your blood would be upon my head. I assure you that there would not be the least chance of you coming back alive. It is only by remembering certain complex landmarks that I am able to do it. Okay, so we're going to stop right there because we're kind of at the end of this time. So we are in the middle of chapter 7. Oh, it's a pretty long chapter too. We are dead in the middle of it. So we'll pick that up next time. And yeah, so if you are interested in the Hounds of the Baskervilles, again, this is one of the more famous Sherlock Holmes stories written by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. I would suggest check out your local library. If you are an Addison resident, we have 5 copies of this book. So there's plenty of those, not to mention that it's usually included in pretty much any like collection of Sherlock Holmes stories available to you. So yeah, give them a look. It's a really fun story. If you want to catch up where we are now, I have been uploading these videos onto our YouTube and you can see them there. Yeah, so for today, have a wonderful day. Hope to see you next Tuesday. We do this every Tuesday starting at 10 a.m. So, see you next time. Have a great day. Bye.